The radio crackled with Commander Holt's voice cutting through the chaos of gunfire. "Forget the analyst. She's deadweight. We're not risking men for a desk jockey who never should have been here." Static swallowed his words, but Elena Vasquez heard every one of them through the receiver pressed to her ear. 400 meters below, the SEAL team was pinned in a shattered compound while 7 high-value targets scattered into the Afghan mountains like roaches when the lights come on. 20 minutes. That was all the time she had before those targets reached their extraction vehicles and disappeared forever. Elena steadied her breathing, the way she had learned to do in places that did not exist on any official map, and sighted her first target through the scope. 36 hours earlier, the Black Hawk touched down at Forward Operating Base Kestrel in a storm of brown dust that tasted like chalk and diesel. Elena grabbed her kit bag and stepped onto Afghan soil for the 3rd time in her career, though her official file only showed one previous deployment. The rotors were still spinning when a thick-necked chief petty officer approached with all the warmth of a tax audit. "You Vasquez?" he asked, not bothering to hide his assessment of her slight frame beneath the oversized fatigues. She confirmed she was. Chief Petty Officer Terrence Burke looked her up and down like she was a piece of equipment that had arrived broken. "Great. Another desk rider. Follow me. Try to keep up. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Maybe you've seen someone underestimated the way Elena is about to be. Stick around, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about her." Burke set a pace designed to make her struggle, weaving between hardened shelters and communication arrays without looking back. Elena matched him step for step, her breathing unchanged, watching the base layout imprint itself onto her mental map. 3 guard towers, 2 helicopter pads, command structure at the north end. She cataloged it all while Burke pretended she did not exist. The team was assembled in the operations center when they arrived. 8 SEALs in various states of gear preparation, and at the center of them stood Commander Vance Holt. He was exactly what his file suggested. Square jaw going gray at the temples. Eyes that had seen too much and decided to stop being surprised by any of it. 3 combat deployments and enough commendations to paper a wall. He looked up when Burke entered, and his expression flickered with something between irritation and resignation when he saw Elena behind him. "Commander," Burke said, "the intelligence attachment is here." Holt nodded once. "Vasquez, you'll be briefed on protocols tomorrow. Find a rack and stay out of the way until then." Elena had heard dismissals before. She had heard them in 4 languages across 3 continents, usually from men who ended up needing her before their operations concluded. She simply nodded and turned to leave. That was when she noticed the young SEAL in the corner, struggling with a rifle that refused to cooperate. He was maybe 25, lean and eager, and he was about to strip a charging handle that was merely stuck, not broken. She changed direction without thinking. "Mind if I look at that?" she asked. The young operator, Petty Officer First Class Damon Reese, according to his name tape, glanced up with surprise. Most analysts did not talk to operators unless required. Most analysts did not know one end of an M4 from the other. "It is jammed," he said. "Armorer is backed up until tomorrow." Elena held out her hand. Reese hesitated, then passed her the rifle. She turned it over once, found a problem in 3 seconds, and applied precise pressure to a point just behind the ejection port. The charging handle released with a clean snap. She checked the action, cycled it twice, and handed it back. "Carbon buildup behind the cam pin," she said. "Happens when the armorer uses too much lubricant in dry conditions. Should cycle clean now." Reese stared at the rifle, then at her. "How did you know that?" Elena was already walking away. "Lucky guess." She felt eyes on her back. Not Reese. Someone else. She glanced toward the command table and found Senior Chief Marcus Webb watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He was the team's senior enlisted man, 15 years in the teams, and he had the kind of face that gave nothing away. He did not speak. He did not nod. He simply watched her leave with an intensity that suggested he had seen something the others missed. Her quarters were a plywood box with a cot and a footlocker, luxury by FOB standards. Elena secured the door and sat on the thin mattress, finally allowing herself a moment of stillness. She reached into her breast pocket and withdrew a photograph, edges worn soft from years of handling. Two faces smiled back at her. Her own, younger by half a decade, and beside her a man with kind eyes and a scar through his left eyebrow. Marcos. She traced the outline of his face with her thumb. The photograph had been taken the day before the mission that killed him. The day before she had to leave him bleeding in a Damascus alley while extraction pulled her out alone. "I will not fail again," she whispered to the empty room. "Whatever it takes, I will not fail again." Through the thin walls, she could hear Holt's voice carrying from the operations center. "Keep her out of the way, Webb. Last thing we need is some analyst getting in our heads before a priority mission." Webb's response was too low to hear. Elena tucked the photograph away and lay back on the cot, staring at the ceiling. They did not know who she was, what she had done, what she was capable of doing, but they would find out. The morning briefing began at 0600, and Elena made certain she arrived 10 minutes early. The operations center smelled of burnt coffee and tension, maps covering every available wall space, red pins marking confirmed enemy positions across Kiener province. She found a spot near the back where she could observe without drawing attention, though Burke made a point of sighing loudly when she entered. Holt stood at the center table, pointing to satellite imagery while his team gathered around him. The briefing covered patrol schedules, supply routes, and intelligence updates from regional assets. Standard operational information that Elena absorbed while watching something far more interesting unfold. The enemy movement patterns were wrong. She studied the map as Holt talked, tracing the red pins with her eyes, calculating distances and timelines. 3 convoys had been spotted moving through the valley over the past week, but the analysts who compiled the report had missed something obvious. The convoys were not resupply runs. They were rehearsals. "Sir," she said during a pause in the briefing. The room turned toward her as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. "Permission to make an observation." Holt's expression suggested she had asked permission to set fire to his boots. "Make it quick, Vasquez." Elena stepped forward and pointed to the map. "These convoy movements. The report assumes they're resupply operations, but the timing is wrong. Resupply runs optimize for daylight and cover. These convoys moved at intervals of exactly 4 hours and 12 minutes. That is not logistics. That is rehearsal timing for a coordinated action." Burke snorted. "And you figured this out from your desk in Virginia?" "I figured it out from the data in front of us," Elena replied, keeping her voice level. "If I am right, these convoys were practice runs. Whatever they are planning, it happens soon. And it involves multiple simultaneous movements." Holt studied the map for a long moment, and Elena saw something flicker behind his eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition that she might have a point. Then he shook his head. "Noted," he said. "But our analysts have already assessed these patterns. We will proceed with current operational assumptions." She started to respond, but Holt cut her off. "That will be all, Warrant Officer." The briefing continued as if she had not spoken. Elena returned to her position near the back wall and caught Reese glancing at her with something like sympathy. Webb, she noticed, was writing something in his notebook. After the briefing dispersed, Elena made her way to the coffee station, a battered machine that looked like it had survived multiple deployments and resented every one of them. She poured a cup of something that resembled motor oil and smelled slightly worse. Reese appeared beside her, reaching for his own cup. "Fair warning," he said. "That coffee has been classified as a potential chemical weapon. 3 guys from 2nd Platoon swear it gave them temporary blindness." Elena took a sip and grimaced. "Only temporary. That is disappointing." Reese laughed, surprised by the dry humor. "Most analysts I have met do not joke. They just quote regulations and look nervous. Most analysts you have met probably had survival instincts." Elena set down her cup. "Thanks for not laughing back there." During the briefing, Reese shrugged. "You might be right about those convoys. I have seen stranger things turn out to be true." He paused, lowering his voice. "The commander is not a bad guy. He just has history with intelligence attachments." Elena filed that information away. "What kind of history?" Before Reese could answer, Burke's voice cut across the operations center. "Reese, stop flirting with the tourist and get your gear squared away." We have work to do. Reese gave Elena an apologetic look and headed off. She watched him go, then became aware of someone standing behind her. She turned to find Webb holding a coffee cup of his own, his weathered face unreadable. "That thing you did with Reese's rifle yesterday," Webb said quietly. "That was not a lucky guess. That was muscle memory." Elena met his gaze. "I read a lot of technical manuals." Webb almost smiled. "Right?" He took a sip of coffee without flinching, which told Elena everything she needed to know about his pain tolerance. Interesting thing about technical manuals. They do not teach you to clear a jam in 3 seconds flat. That takes about 10,000 repetitions. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Elena to wonder exactly how much the senior chief had already figured out. The afternoon brought a surveillance report that proved her convoy theory correct. Enemy communications, intercepted by a signals team, confirmed that coordinated movements were being planned for a high-value target extraction. Holt read the report in silence while Elena stood in the corner of the operations center, close enough to hear, but far enough to be ignored. Burke was the first to speak. "So the analyst got lucky. Does not mean we change our approach." Holt held up a hand for silence. He was reading the report again, and Elena saw his jaw tighten. When he finally looked up, his eyes found hers for a brief moment before sliding away. "We proceed as planned," he said, "but we increase surveillance on those convoy routes." It was not an acknowledgement. It was not an apology. But it was something. That night, Elena found herself unable to sleep. She walked the perimeter of the FOB in the darkness, nodding to the guards who watched her pass with mild curiosity. The stars above Kiener Province were impossibly bright, the kind of sky you only saw in places where electricity was a luxury. She stopped near the northern guard tower and heard voices drifting down from above. 2 operators talking quietly, unaware of her presence below. "You hear what happened to Holt's last intelligence attachment?" one of them said. "That CIA woman. Carla something," the other replied. "Torres. Yeah, bad deal." Elena held her breath, pressing herself against the tower's support beam. "She died on that compound raid in Helmand," the first voice continued. "Holt blames himself, but everyone knows the real story. She went back for 2 wounded operators when the evac was already spinning up. Took a round in the throat, pulling them to cover. So she died a hero. She died because Holt let her come along on a direct action mission. At least that is how he sees it. Ever since then, he will not let any female attachments anywhere near the sharp end. Thinks he is protecting them." Elena closed her eyes. The pieces were falling into place now. Holt was not cruel. He was haunted. He had watched a woman die, trying to prove herself, and he had decided the only way to prevent it from happening again was to keep women away from danger entirely. He was wrong, of course. Carla Torres had not died because she was a woman. She had died because she was brave. But grief rarely listened to logic. Elena returned to her quarters as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. She had barely sat down on her cot when her radio crackled. "All personnel to Operations Center. Priority intelligence incoming." She was moving before the message finished. Whatever was coming, it was happening faster than anyone expected. The Operations Center was already crowded when she arrived. Holt stood at the center table, his face grim as he studied a fresh satellite image. 7 figures were visible in the frame, gathered around a compound in the valley below. "Malik Farhan," Holt said, and all 6 of his lieutenants, together for the first time in 18 months. He looked up at his team. "Gentlemen, we have a 72-hour window to eliminate the most wanted terrorist cell in this province. Mission planning begins now." Elena stepped forward. "Commander, request permission to participate in mission planning." The room went quiet. Burke actually laughed. Holt's response was ice. "You will monitor the operation from the TOC, Vasquez, like every other analyst." His eyes met hers, and she saw Carla Torres reflected in them, saw the ghost he was still trying to protect. "This is a SEAL operation. You will watch from the screens where you belong." The mission briefing consumed the next 14 hours. Elena sat in the corner of the operations center, officially present as an intelligence resource, practically invisible as Holt and his team constructed their assault plan. She watched and listened and said nothing, even when she saw the flaw that would get people killed. The target compound sat in a narrow valley, accessible by 2 roads and surrounded by mountainous terrain. Malik Farhan had chosen his meeting location well. The natural geography created a fortress with limited approach vectors and multiple escape routes carved into the hillsides over generations of tribal conflict. Holt walked through the plan methodically. 2 fire teams would insert by helicopter at 0300, approaching from the south under cover of darkness. They would breach the compound simultaneously from east and west, eliminate all targets, and extract before dawn. Clean and surgical, except it was not clean. Elena studied the terrain map and saw what the planners had missed. The northern ridge offered a perfect overwatch position for enemy sentries. Anyone watching from that elevation would see the helicopters coming from 3 kilometers out, and the escape routes did not lead randomly into the mountains. They converged at a vehicle staging point on the far side of the valley. If the targets scattered, they would have transportation waiting. She raised her hand. Holt ignored her for a full minute before acknowledging her presence with a curt nod. The northern approach, Elena said. Your plan assumes minimal enemy observation from that quadrant, but the terrain analysis shows a natural overwatch position at grid reference 472. If they have sentries posted there, they will have visual on your insertion. Burke rolled his eyes. We have drone coverage. If anyone is up there, we will see them. Drone coverage has blind spots in that terrain, Elena replied. The ridge creates shadows that thermal imaging cannot penetrate. I would recommend a scout element to clear that position before the main insertion. Holt's expression did not change. Recommendation noted. We proceed as planned. Sir, if the targets have early warning, they will scatter before you breach. Those escape routes lead to a vehicle staging area. You could lose all 7 of them in the first 60 seconds. I said we proceed as planned, Vasquez. Holt's voice carried an edge of finality. Your job is to provide intelligence support from the TOC. Let us worry about the tactical execution. Elena held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, then nodded. Understood, Commander. The briefing continued. Elena remained silent, but her mind was already working through contingencies. If the operation went wrong, if the targets scattered exactly as she predicted, what would it take to salvage the mission? She began memorizing the escape routes, tracing each path from the compound to its terminus, calculating distances and travel times. A voice surfaced from memory, unbidden. You always did prefer the direct approach, Vasquez. Marcos, laughing at her in a safe house in Beirut after she had suggested walking straight into an enemy compound instead of waiting for extraction. Sometimes the obvious move is obvious because it works. She pushed the memory down and focused on the maps. That evening, while the team conducted final equipment checks, Elena slipped into the supply depot. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this before, in places where being caught meant something far worse than a reprimand. Her hands found familiar shapes in the dim light. A tactical vest, ammunition, a rifle that had been marked for maintenance but functioned perfectly well. She packed everything into a kit bag and secured it beneath her desk in the TOC, hidden from casual observation. When she turned around, Webb was standing in the doorway. Neither of them spoke. Webb's eyes moved from her face to the desk where the kit bag was poorly concealed, then back to her face. Something passed between them in that silence. An understanding, perhaps, or a warning. Webb turned and walked away without a word. Elena released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The senior chief knew. He knew, and he had chosen not to report her. She filed that information alongside everything else she had learned about this team and returned to studying her maps. The hours before insertion crawled past with agonizing slowness. Elena reviewed every piece of intelligence on Malik Farhan and his lieutenants. 7 men responsible for 3 years of attacks on coalition forces and Afghan civilians. 7 men who would disappear into the mountains if tonight went wrong. Reese found her in the TOC an hour before departure, his gear already strapped tight and his face painted for night operations. He looked younger somehow, despite the war paint. Young enough to remind her of operators she had worked with in another life. Young enough to get killed if she was right about the Northern Ridge. Vasquez, he said, just wanted to say thanks again. For the rifle thing. Elena looked up from her screens. Watch the Northern approach tonight. Reese frowned. What do you mean? She held his gaze, willing him to understand without her having to explain. If something goes wrong, if you take contact from an unexpected direction, it will come from the north. Stay alert on that quadrant. He studied her face for a long moment. You really think this op is going to go sideways? I think you should watch the Northern approach. Elena turned back to her screens. Good luck out there, petty officer. Reese lingered for another moment, then nodded and left. She heard his footsteps fade down the corridor, joining the controlled chaos of final preparations. At 0245, Elena stood outside the operations center and watched the team board their helicopters. Holt was the last to climb aboard, and for a brief moment their eyes met across the dusty landing zone. His expression carried something she had not seen before. Not hostility, not dismissal, something closer to doubt. Then the doors closed, and the rotors spun up, and the Blackhawks lifted into the Afghan night, carrying 8 SEALs toward a compound in the valley below. Elena returned to the TOC and took her position at the monitoring station. The screens showed drone feeds, thermal imaging, communication intercepts. Everything she needed to watch the operation unfold from a safe distance. Her hand drifted to the kit bag beneath her desk. The weight of it was reassuring. Familia. The radio crackled with Holt's voice. Kestrel TOC, this is Viper 1. We are 15 minutes out. Beginning final approach. Elena watched the helicopter icons move across the screen toward the target compound. In 15 minutes, she would know if she was right about the Northern Ridge. In 15 minutes, she would know if 7 terrorists were about to escape into the mountains. Her fingers tightened on the kit bag strap. Whatever happened next, she would not watch from the sidelines. The screens painted the operation in shades of green and white, thermal signatures moving through darkness toward a compound that glowed with body heat. Elena watched the helicopter icons reach their insertion point and disappear as the teams fast-stroked to the ground. 8 operators now moving on foot through terrain that wanted to kill them. Viper 1, boots on ground. Holt's voice reported through the radio. Beginning approach to target compound. Elena tracked their progress on the drone feed, her eyes flicking between multiple screens. The compound remained quiet. 7 heat signatures visible inside, clustered in what appeared to be a central meeting room. Everything looked perfect. That was what worried her. The first fire team reached the eastern wall. The second team moved into position on the western approach. Elena watched the choreography unfold with the detached precision of someone who had seen it before, who knew how quickly perfection could collapse into chaos. Viper 1, this is Viper 2. In position, ready to breach. Holt's response came steady and calm. All elements, stand by. Breach on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Execute. The compound walls bloomed with explosive breaches on 2 sides. The thermal signatures of the operators poured through the gaps, moving with lethal efficiency toward the central room where 7 terrorists waited. Then the world came apart. Elena saw it happen on the screens before she heard the reports. Secondary explosions rippling through the compound. IEDs buried in the approach corridors, triggered by the breach. The thermal signatures scattered, some falling, others scrambling for cover. And the 7 targets in the central room were already moving, already splitting apart through exits that should not have existed. Contact! Contact! Holt shouted over the radio. We have IEDs in the corridors. Multiple casualties. The targets are running. Elena's hands gripped the edge of the console. On screen, she watched the 7 heat signatures flee in different directions, each one taking a separate escape route into the mountains. They had known. They had prepared. The entire compound was a trap designed to delay the assault team while the targets vanished. Viper 2, this is Viper 1. Status report. Burke's voice came back ragged with pain. We have 3 wounded. Garcia took shrapnel to the leg. Morrison and Chun are down, but mobile. We are pinned in the eastern corridor. Enemy reinforcements closing from the south. The drone feed confirmed it. A dozen new heat signatures were converging on the compound from multiple directions. The SEAL team had walked into an ambush, and now they were fighting for survival while their targets escaped. Kestrel Base, this is Viper 1. Request immediate extraction. We are combat ineffective and taking fire. The response from base operations was grim. Viper 1, extraction birds are inbound but cannot land under current fire conditions. You need to suppress enemy positions before we can extract. Elena watched the chaos unfold with a cold clarity that surprised even herself. The team was trapped. The targets were scattering. And every second that passed put those 7 men further beyond reach. Then she saw it. The northern ridge. A muzzle flash on the thermal feed. Exactly where she had predicted enemy observation would be positioned. The sentries had spotted the insertion, warned the targets, and were now directing fire onto the pinned SEAL team. Reese's voice cut through the radio traffic. Viper 1, I have contact from the north. Repeat, contact from the north. She was right. Vasquez was right about the northern approach. Elena did not wait to hear Holt's response. She was already moving, pulling the kit bag from beneath her desk and slinging it over her shoulder. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, muscle memory from 1,000 hours of training in facilities that did not officially exist. A communications officer looked up as she headed for the door. Warrant officer, where are you going? You're supposed to monitor from here. Elena did not slow down. Monitor this. She keyed her radio as she exited the TOC into the cold Afghan night. Commander Holt, this is Vasquez. I am coming to your position. The response was immediate and furious. Negative, Vasquez. Return to the TOC immediately. That is a direct order. Sir, your team is pinned and your targets are escaping. I can help. You are an analyst. Holt's voice crackled with frustration and something else. Something that sounded almost like fear. You will get yourself killed, and I will not have another death on my conscience. Return to base. Now, Elena reached the motor pool and commandeered a tactical vehicle. She could hear the distant thunder of gunfire echoing through the valley, could see the flash of explosions against the mountain ridgeline. Commander, those 7 targets are going to reach their extraction vehicles in approximately 20 minutes. If that happens, they disappear. Everything your team just bled for becomes meaningless. Static filled the radio. Then Holt's voice, heavy with resignation and rage. You cannot stop them, Vasquez. There's 7 of them scattered across 3 kilometers of hostile terrain. One person cannot stop 7 targets from reaching extraction. Elena gunned the engine and headed toward the valley. The cold night air bit at her face through the open window, carrying the smell of cordite and dust. Watch me, she said. She killed the radio and focused on the terrain ahead. Somewhere in those mountains, 7 men were running for their lives. They thought they had escaped. They thought the ambush had worked. They were wrong. Elena had spent 6 years hunting men like Malik Farhan in places far more dangerous than this valley. She had operated alone in Damascus, in Beirut, in black sites that existed only in classified files. She had been the ghost that terrorists feared without ever knowing her name. Tonight, that ghost was hunting again. She checked her rifle one more time and accelerated into the darkness. Elena abandoned the vehicle 2 kilometers from the compound and continued on foot. The terrain was brutal, loose shale and steep inclines that would have slowed most operators to a crawl. She moved through it like water through cracks in stone, her body remembering patterns drilled into muscle and bone during years of training that her official file never mentioned. The gunfire ahead grew louder as she climbed. She could hear the distinctive crack of American weapons answered by the deeper thump of enemy AK fire. The team was still engaged, still fighting, still buying time they did not know she needed. Her radio crackled with fragmented transmissions. Garcia's bleeding out. We need that extraction now. Then Burke's voice, strained but steady. Viper 1, I count 15 hostiles closing from the south. We cannot hold this position much longer. Holt's response carried the weight of command decisions no one should have to make. All elements, fall back to the western corridor. We consolidate and defend until extraction arrives. Elena reached the ridgeline and dropped to a prone position, her rifle already coming up to her shoulder. The valley spread out below her like a tactical map come to life. She could see the compound, smoke rising from the breached walls. She could see the muzzle flashes of the firefight, her team pinned against superior numbers. And she could see the escape routes, 7 paths carved into the mountainside, each one carrying a terrorist toward freedom. She pulled a small scope from her vest and began scanning. The first target appeared almost immediately. A figure in dark clothing moving fast through the ruins of an abandoned village 400 meters to the east. She recognized him from the intelligence photos. Rashid Khoury, Malik Farhan's communications specialist. The man who had coordinated 3 suicide bombings in Kabul. Elena checked the wind. Light, coming from the northwest at maybe 5 knots. She adjusted her scope and settled her breathing into the rhythm she had learned in a CIA facility buried beneath the Virginia countryside. 4 heartbeats between breaths. Finger on the trigger during the pause. Squeeze, do not pull. The radio interrupted her focus. Viper 1, this is Kestrel TOC. We have visual on an unidentified figure on the eastern ridge. Please confirm friendly position. Holt's voice came back confused. Negative, TOC. All Viper elements are inside the compound. We have no friendlies on that ridge. Elena realized they were talking about her. The drone operators had spotted her position and were trying to determine if she was a threat. In about 30 seconds, someone might make the decision to eliminate the unknown contact. She keyed her radio. Kestrel TOC, this is Vasquez. I'm a contact on the eastern ridge. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Vasquez. Holt's voice was incredulous. What the hell are you doing up there? My job, Commander. She returned her eye to the scope. Khoury was still moving, picking his way through the ruins toward a path that would take him over the mountain and out of reach forever. 400 meters. Slight downhill angle. Wind steady. Below in the compound, Webb had found a position with a partial view of the ridge. He raised his weapon, sighting on the distant figure, then froze as recognition dawned. His voice came over the radio, quiet and stunned. Commander, Vasquez is on the ridge. She's out a rifle. Elena heard the transmission but did not respond. Her world had narrowed to the scope, the target, the space between heartbeats. Khoury paused at a gap in the ruins, checking his path forward. He would be exposed for exactly 2 seconds. 1 heartbeat. 2. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with familiar authority. 400 meters away, Rashid Khoury dropped like a puppet with cut strings. He did not get up. Elena was already scanning for the next target before his body settled. The radio exploded with confused chatter. What the hell was that? Who is firing? Contact on the eastern ridge. Wait, that was outgoing. Someone is shooting at the targets. Viper 1, this is Webb. She got 1. Vasquez just dropped one of the runners. Elena found her second target. Another lieutenant. This one moving faster than Khoury, already 600 meters out and climbing toward a vehicle staging area. She did the math in her head. 20 minutes until extraction vehicles. 7 targets, now 6. 6 scattered across 3 kilometers of mountain terrain, each one taking a different path. Impossible. But she had faced impossible odds before. In a Damascus alley with 3 bullets left and 5 enemies closing. In a Beirut basement with her cover blown and no extraction coming. She had survived because she understood something that most people never learned. Impossible only meant no one had done it yet. She adjusted her position, tracking the second target through her scope. This shot would be harder. 600 meters, uphill angle, target moving. She would need to lead him by almost a full body length. Behind her, the firefight at the compound continued. Her team was still pinned, still bleeding, still fighting. But for the first time since the operation began, Elena felt something shift in the balance. The hunters had become the hunted. She settled her breathing and found the space between heartbeats. 6 targets remaining. 19 minutes until they reached their vehicles. She pulled the trigger. The second target fell at 600 meters, his body tumbling down the rocky slope before coming to rest against a boulder. Elena was already moving before he stopped rolling, relocating to a new position 20 meters east. In her world, staying still meant dying. The enemy would triangulate her location from the muzzle flash. She had maybe 40 seconds before return fire found her previous position. She settled behind a new outcropping and scanned the terrain. 2 more heat signatures were converging on a single point, a pickup truck hidden in a ravine 800 meters to the northwest. 2 lieutenants making for the same vehicle. If they reached it, they would be gone in seconds. Elena did the math. 800 meters. 2 targets. Moving fast but predictable, following the terrain toward the only cover that made sense. She would have one chance. She found the first target in her scope, a man named Fard Nazari, according to the intelligence files. Bomb maker. 17 confirmed kills from IEDs planted along coalition supply routes. He was running hard, arms pumping, convinced he was going to make it. Elena exhaled slowly and squeezed. Nazari dropped. His companion, another lieutenant named Yusuf Ahmadi, froze for half a second, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. That half second was all Elena needed. She shifted her aim 3 degrees right and fired again. Ahmadi fell beside his dead comrade for seconds after Nazari hit the ground. In the compound below, the radio traffic had devolved into chaos. What the hell is happening out there? Bert's voice was ragged, disbelief cracking through his usual hostility. Who is taking these shots? Webb answered, his tone carrying something Elena had never heard from him before. Wonder, perhaps. Or fear. It is Vasquez. She just dropped 2 more. 400 meters apart for seconds between shots. Silence on the radio. Then Holt's voice, quiet and strange. That is not possible. Commander, I am watching it happen on a drone feed. She is relocating now, moving east along the ridgeline. Burke again, anger masking his confusion. Who the hell is she? No one answered. No one knew. Elena heard the radio traffic through her earpiece but did not respond. She was already scanning for the next targets, her mind running calculations that had become as natural as breathing. 4 down, 3 remaining. 14 minutes until extraction vehicles. The enemy had figured out what was happening. Radio intercepts crackled with panicked Pashto, voices screaming about a sniper on the ridge. The remaining 3 targets were splitting apart, each one taking a different escape route, trying to make themselves harder to track. Elena keyed her radio for the first time since the hunt began. Commander Holt, I have 3 targets still mobile. 1 moving northwest toward the vehicle staging area, 1 heading east through the ruins, 1 circling south toward your position. She delivered the information with clinical precision, coordinates and distances and movement vectors. The voice that came through the radio was not the voice of an intelligence analyst. It was the voice of someone who had done this many times before. Holt responded slowly, as if speaking to a stranger. Vasquez, how are you doing this? The target moving south is your primary concern, she continued, ignoring his question. He is heading for a technical truck mounted with a heavy weapon. If he reaches it, he will have line of sight on your position. Reese's voice cut through. She is tracking them. All of them. How is she tracking all of them? Elena did not answer. She was already moving again, abandoning the ridgeline for lower ground. The southern target was too far for a clean shot from her current position, and he was moving fast. She needed to close the distance before he reached that truck. As she ran, her hand brushed against the pocket where she kept the photograph. Marcos smiled at her from memory, his voice echoing across 6 years of grief. You always did prefer the direct approach. I will not fail again, she whispered between breaths. I will not fail. The terrain blurred beneath her feet. She had trained for this in the mountains of North Carolina, in the deserts of Nevada, in facilities that did not appear on any official map. Her body remembered the rhythm of pursuit, the calculation of angles and distances, the cold clarity that came when everything else fell away. The southern target came into view. He was close now, maybe 300 meters, sprinting toward a technical truck parked in a narrow canyon. Elena could see the mounted gun on the back, a heavy machine gun that would tear through the compound walls like paper. She dropped to one knee and raised her rifle. The target reached the truck and climbed into the gun position. Elena sighted, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, sparking off the truck's frame. The target ducked behind the weapon mount, protected by the vehicle's bulk. She had no angle, no clear shot, and now he was swinging the gun toward the compound where her team was pinned. Elena was on her feet and running before the conscious decision formed. 300 meters of open ground between her and a mounted machine gun. Suicide by any reasonable measure. But reasonable had stopped applying to this night a long time ago. She sprinted toward the truck, rifle in hand, closing the distance with every stride. The gunner was still trying to acquire the compound, still unaware that death was running toward him across the moonlit valley. 200 meters. 150. He saw her. The gun began to turn. The machine gun opened fire, but the gunner was panicking, his rounds chewing into the dirt 20 meters to Elena's left. She did not slow down. She did not deviate. She ran straight at the muzzle flash with the cold certainty of someone who had made peace with death a long time ago. 100 meters. The gun was tracking toward her, correcting. 70 meters. She could see the gunner's face now, young and terrified, struggling to bring the heavy weapon to bear on a target moving faster than he expected. 50 meters. She dropped into a slide behind a collapsed mud wall, her rifle coming up in one fluid motion. The gunner had her position now. The barrel was swinging toward her hiding spot. Elena rose from cover and fired twice. The first round took the gunner in the chest. The second was unnecessary, but she fired it anyway, old habits refusing to die. He slumped over the weapon, his fingers still twitching on the trigger, sending a final burst harmlessly into the night sky. The driver saw his gunner fall and made the only decision his terror would allow. He floored the accelerator, the technical lurching forward toward the canyon exit. Elena tracked the vehicle through her scope, calculated speed and distance in the space between heartbeats, and led the target by 2 meters. The windshield shattered. The truck veered hard right and slammed into a rock formation with a crunch of metal and glass. It did not move again. 5 down, 2 remaining. Elena was already running before the dust settled, heading northwest toward the village where the final 2 targets had fled. Her lungs burned and her legs screamed for rest, but she had learned long ago that the body could endure far more than the mind believed possible. Pain was just information. She filed it away and kept moving. The radio crackled in her ear. Kestrel Base, this is Viper 1. Extraction birds are on approach. We are moving wounded to the LZ now. Elena felt a knot loosen in her chest. The team was getting out. Garcia and the others would reach medical care. Whatever happened next, at least that much was salvageable. Webb's voice came next, quiet and directed specifically at her. Vasquez, we are extracting. What is your status? She keyed her radio without slowing her pace. 2 targets remaining, Malik Farhan and 1 lieutenant. They are heading for the village on the northwest ridge. I am in pursuit. A long pause. Then Holt's voice, and something had changed in it. The certainty was gone, replaced by something she could not quite identify. Vasquez, you have done enough. Fall back to extraction. That is not a request. Negative, Commander. If Farhan reaches the village, he disappears into the population. We lose him forever. Another pause, longer this time. When Holt spoke again, his voice was heavy with something that might have been respect or resignation. Understood. We will relay your position to the extraction team. Do not get yourself killed out there. Copy that. She killed the radio and focused on the terrain. The village appeared ahead, a cluster of mud brick buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a ship's hull. Malik Farhan was in there somewhere, wounded and desperate, running out of options. Elena slowed as she reached the village perimeter, her senses shifting from pursuit to hunting mode. The buildings created shadows and blind corners, 100 places for an ambush. She moved between structures with her rifle raised, clearing each angle before advancing. A blood trail caught her attention, fresh droplets on the dusty stone, leading deeper into the village. One of her earlier shots must have found flesh after all. Farhan was wounded, slowing down. She was close now. She followed the blood through a narrow alley, past a bombed-out structure that might have been a shop, around a corner into a small courtyard. The blood trail ended at a doorway. Elena approached the door slowly, every sense straining for information. The building was dark, silent. Farhan could be inside, bleeding out, waiting for death to find him. Or he could be waiting with a weapon, ready to take her with him. She was 3 steps from the doorway when she heard it. A footstep behind her, soft but unmistakable. The scrape of a boot on stone. The lieutenant. Elena spun, but she was already too late. The man had circled back through the village while she followed the blood trail, using his wounded leader as bait. He was 5 meters away, emerging from the shadows of a collapsed wall, an AK-47 rising toward her chest. She recognized him from the intelligence photos. Hassan Mir, Farhan's most trusted enforcer. 12 years as the cell's primary interrogator. The man who had personally executed 3 captured coalition soldiers. His finger tightened on the trigger. Elena had no time to aim, no time to think. She threw herself sideways as the AK barked, feeling the rounds pass close enough to tug at her sleeve. She hit the ground rolling, bringing her rifle up from pure instinct, and fired 3 times from her back. The first round missed. The second caught Mir in the hip, spinning him sideways. The third punched through his throat. He fell against the wall and slid down slowly, his weapon clattering to the stone beside him. His eyes found hers in the darkness, filled with surprise and something that might have been admiration. Then the light went out of them, and he was gone. 6 down. Elena lay on the cold stone for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. That had been close. Closer than anything since Damascus. She touched her sleeve and felt the torn fabric where Mir's rounds had passed within inches of her arm. She pushed herself to her feet and checked her rifle. 1 target remaining. Malik Farhan, wounded, cornered, and waiting for her in the building ahead. 9 minutes left. Elena checked her ammunition. 2 magazines remaining. She pulled a field dressing from her vest and wrapped the gash on her forearm, where a shard of stone had cut deep during the firefight with Mir. The blood soaked through the bandage almost immediately, but she tied it tight and pushed the pain somewhere far away. The radio crackled. "Vasquez, this is Reese. We are aboard the extraction bird. Are you okay out there?" She did not respond. There was nothing to say that would not waste precious seconds. "Vasquez." Reese's voice carried an edge of worry. "Comain, Vasquez. What is your status?" Webb's voice cut through. "Leave her alone, Reese. She is working." On the drone feed miles above, Webb watched Elena move through the village with fluid precision. He had seen operators work before. He had served alongside the best the teams had to offer. But this was something different. This was the kind of movement they taught in places that did not officially exist. That is agency training, he murmured, half to himself. "She is sad. She has to be." Holt sat beside him in the helicopter, his eyes fixed on the same screen. He did not respond. His face had gone pale in the green glow of the display, watching everything he thought he knew collapse into dust. Elena reached the edge of the village and paused behind a crumbling wall. Ahead, an abandoned school building squatted at the base of the ridge, its windows dark and empty. According to the intelligence files, it had been used as a Taliban command post before coalition forces cleared the area 3 years ago. Now, it was just another ruin in a landscape full of ruins. But Malik Farhan was inside. She could feel it. A new sound reached her ears, distant but growing closer. An engine, laboring up the mountain road from the valley floor. Farhan's extraction vehicle, coming to collect its passenger. Elena checked her watch. For minutes, maybe less. She moved toward the school building, staying low, using the shadows. The front entrance was a gaping wound in the structure's face, the doors long since destroyed. She circled to the side, looking for another way in. 2 figures emerged from behind a pile of rubble near the building's corner. Local fighters, young men with old rifles, stationed as guards. They saw her at the same moment she saw them. Elena did not hesitate. She fired twice, dropping the first guard before he could raise his weapon. The second managed to get off, a wild burst that chewed into the wall beside her head, showering her with fragments. She put 2 rounds into his chest, and he fell backward into the rubble. The gunfire would have alerted Farhan. He knew she was coming now. She breached through a side window, rolling into what had once been a classroom. Desks lay overturned and broken, chalkboard shattered, the remnants of education destroyed by years of war. Elena swept the room with her rifle, found it empty, and moved toward the interior corridor. The blood trail resumed here, fresh droplets leading toward the back of the building. Farhan was hurt worse than she had thought. Good. Wounded men made mistakes. The engine sound was louder now. 2 minutes, maybe less. Elena moved down the corridor, clearing each doorway as she passed. Empty classroom. Empty classroom. A room that had been converted to a storage space. Crates of ammunition stacked against the walls. She filed the location away and kept moving. The corridor ended at a large room, perhaps the school's main hall. Elena paused at the threshold, listening. Labored breathing echoed from somewhere inside, the sound of a man struggling to stay conscious. She went in low, rifle sweeping the darkness. Malik Farhan was slumped against the far wall, his hand pressed to a wound in his side that was leaking blood between his fingers. He looked smaller than his photograph suggested, older and more fragile. 3 years of orchestrating terror, reduced to a bleeding man in a ruined school. He saw her, and something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, recognition. You, he said, his voice thick with pain. The woman from the ridge. Elena kept her rifle trained on his chest. Do not move. Farhan laughed, a wet sound that ended in a cough. I am not moving anywhere. You have seen to that. He gestured weakly at his wound. Your bullet. Earlier. I did not think it hit. You were running. Hard to tell. The engine sound was very close now. Headlights swept across the windows at the back of the building. Farhan's extraction had arrived. He smiled, blood staining his teeth. You are too late. My men are here. Even if you kill me, you will not escape. Elena heard vehicle doors opening. Voices calling in Pashto. Footsteps approaching the building. At least 3 men, maybe more, coming to collect their leader. She had maybe 60 seconds before they reached this room. Farhan's smile widened. You should run, he said. Save yourself. You cannot kill me and fight your way out. Not even you. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she ejected her nearly empty magazine, slammed home her last full one, and moved toward the back of the building. Farhan's smile faltered. What are you doing? She did not answer. She was already calculating angles and distances, the familiar rhythm of combat settling over her like a second skin. 3 men minimum. 1 magazine. 60 seconds. Impossible. She had faced worse. The back door burst open and the first fighter came through. The first fighter died before he cleared the doorway. Elena put 2 rounds into his chest, and he collapsed backward in a man behind him. The second fighter stumbled over the falling body, his rifle discharging wildly into the ceiling. Elena shot him twice in the head. The third man was smarter. He dove to the side, using the doorframe as cover, and fired a burst that forced Elena behind an overturned desk. Splinters exploded around her as rounds punched through the wood. She counted his shots, waiting for the pause. It came. She rose and fired 4 times through the doorframe. The third fighter slumped against the wall, his weapon clattering to the floor. Silence fell over the school building. Elena swept the back entrance, checking for additional threats. The extraction vehicle sat idling in the darkness beyond, its headlights cutting through the dust. Empty now. 3 men had come in. 3 men were dead. She turned back to Malik Farhan. He had dragged himself across the floor during the firefight, leaving a smear of blood in his wake. His hand was reaching for a pistol that lay half-hidden beneath a collapsed desk. He froze when he saw her looking at him. Do not, Elena said. Farhan pulled his hand back slowly. His face had gone gray, the blood loss catching up to him. But his eyes remained sharp, calculating even now. Wait, he said. Wait. You do not understand. I have information. Names. Locations. The network extends far beyond my cell. I can give you everything. Elena walked toward him, her rifle never wavering. She had heard this speech before in different languages from different men. The words changed, but the desperation was always the same. I could be valuable, Farhan continued, his voice taking on an edge of panic. The Americans will want what I know. Your commanders will want it. Kill me, and you lose everything in my head. Elena stopped 2 meters from him and looked down at the man who had orchestrated so much death. 17 coalition soldiers killed by his IEDs. 43 Afghan civilians murdered in suicide bombings he planned. 3 years of terror, and here he was bargaining for his life like a merchant in a bazaar. You're not my first high-value target, she said quietly. You're not even my 10th. Something changed in Farhan's eyes. The calculation gave way to something else. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. Who are you? He whispered. Elena did not answer. She did not need to. Farhan saw the truth in her face, in the cold efficiency of her movements, in the way she held her weapon like an extension of her body. He understood now what he was facing. Not an intelligence analyst. Not a desk jockey who had gotten lucky. Something far more dangerous. His hand moved toward the pistol again, a final desperate lunge. Elena fired once. Malik Farhan's body slumped against the wall, the light fading from his eyes. 3 years of hunting, and it ended here, in a ruined school on an Afghan mountainside. 7 down. Elena checked her watch. 23 minutes since she had taken her first shot on the ridgeline. 23 minutes to eliminate 7 high-value targets across 3 kilometers of hostile terrain. She secured the building methodically, searching Farhan's body and the room around him. A laptop in a carrying case. A satellite phone with stored numbers. A leather satchel filled with documents, maps, and photographs. Intelligence that would take months to analyze, that would save American lives for years to come. She gathered everything and moved to the front of the building, stepping over bodies without looking down. The adrenaline was fading now, and she could feel the exhaustion waiting beneath it like deep water. Her radio crackled. Vasquez, this is Kestrel Base. What is your status? She keyed the transmit button. All 7 targets eliminated. I have recovered intelligence materials from the primary target. Requesting extraction from my position. Dead silence on the radio. Then Webb's voice, barely above a whisper. Vasquez, what the hell are you? Elena leaned against the schoolhouse wall and let herself slide down to a sitting position. Her wounded arm throbbed. Her legs ached. She was covered in dust and blood. Some of it hers, most of it not. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph. Marcos smiled up at her, frozen forever in a moment before everything went wrong. I am what you needed me to be, she said quietly, to him and to Webb and to no one at all. The helicopter arrived 15 minutes later, its rotors beating the air into submission as it descended toward the school building. Elena pushed herself to her feet, gathering the intelligence materials and slinging her rifle over her shoulder. The side door opened, and Holt stepped out. He walked toward her across the dusty ground, his face unreadable in the pre-dawn light. Behind him, Elena could see Webb and Reese and the others watching from the helicopter, their expressions a mixture of awe and confusion. Holt stopped 3 feet away and looked at her. Really looked, perhaps for the first time since she had arrived at FOB Kestrel. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had happened and everything that had yet to be said. Elena held his gaze and waited. She had done what needed to be done. She had saved his team and completed the mission and eliminated 7 men who would have killed thousands more. But she had also disobeyed direct orders, revealed capabilities she had been ordered to keep hidden, and shattered every assumption Holt had ever made about who she was. Everything depended on what happened next. Holt stood before her in the gray light of approaching dawn, and Elena could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Everything he thought he knew was colliding with everything he had just witnessed, and the wreckage was still settling. "Who are you?" he finally asked. The real answer. Elena considered lying. She had been trained to lie, had built entire identities from nothing but fabrication and commitment. But looking at Holt's face, at the genuine confusion and something that might have been respect fighting for space in his expression, she found she did not want to lie anymore. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said. "That part is real. Before I was assigned to military intelligence, I spent 6 years with the CIA Special Activities Division. Paramilitary operations. Deep cover work in places that do not appear on official maps." Holt absorbed this in silence. His jaw tightened, but he did not look away. "I operated in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. I did things that required people like me to not officially exist." She paused, the words coming harder now. "I had a partner, Marcos Reyes. We worked together for 4 years. He was the best operator I ever knew." "What happened to him?" Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph. She held it so Holt could see the face smiling beside hers. "We were compromised on an operation in Damascus. Someone sold us out. Marcos took 3 rounds covering my extraction. I had to leave him in an alley while the helicopter pulled me out. He died before anyone could get back to him." Holt looked at the photograph for a long moment. His expression shifted, something cracking beneath the surface. "After that," Elena continued, "I was burned. The agency decided I was too compromised for field work. They reassigned me to military intelligence as a safe posting, a place where I could use my skills without anyone knowing what I really was. And you've been trying to get back in the field ever since." Every day, Elena said, every single day, the helicopter's rotors continued their steady beat behind them. The team was still watching from the open door, close enough to see but too far to hear. Elena imagined what they must be thinking. The analysts they had dismissed, standing before their commander covered in blood and dust, having just accomplished what an entire SEAL team could not. Holt was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The command authority was still there, but something else had crept in beside it. Something human. "I owe you an apology," he said. Elena shook her head. "You do not owe me anything." "Yes, I do." Holt met her eyes directly. "I looked at you, and I saw Carla Torres. I saw a woman who was going to get herself killed trying to prove something, and I decided the only way to prevent that was to keep you away from danger." He paused. "I was wrong. You were trying to protect your team. I was trying to protect myself," Holt admitted, "from having to watch another woman die on my watch. But that was never your burden to carry, and it sure as hell was not your limitation to accept." He extended his hand. Elena looked at it for a moment, then clasped it firmly. "Thank you," he said, "for saving my team, for completing the mission, for being exactly what we needed, even when I was too blind to see it." Elena nodded slowly. Something loosened in her chest, a tension she had been carrying so long she had forgotten it was there. Holt released her hand and turned toward the helicopter. "Time to get you out of here, Vasquez. You look like hell." She almost smiled. "I have looked worse." They walked back to the helicopter together. As they approached, Elena could see the team's faces more clearly now. Reese was grinning despite the bandage wrapped around his arm, his eyes bright with something that looked like vindication. Webb stood near the door, his weathered face carrying a single nod of acknowledgement that meant more than any words could convey. Burke stood apart from the others. When Elena's eyes found his, he looked away quickly, unable to hold her gaze. She saw the conflict in his posture, the struggle to reconcile everything he had believed with everything he had witnessed. She did not need his apology. The truth was acknowledgement enough. She climbed into the helicopter and found a seat near the door. The intelligence materials sat heavy in her lap. Months of work for analysts back at Langley. Livza would be saved by information pulled from a dead man's satchel. Reese leaned toward her as the helicopter lifted off. "That was the most incredible thing I have ever seen," he said. 7 targets. 23 minutes. "How did you do it?" Elena looked out the window at the Afghan mountains falling away below them. The sun was cresting the eastern ridges now, painting the peaks in shades of gold and amber. A new day beginning over a landscape that had seen too many endings. "Practice," she said quietly. The flight back to FOB Kestrel took 20 minutes. When they landed, Holt pulled Elena aside before she could disappear into the operations center. "There are going to be questions about this," he said. "Official questions. The agency is going to want to know why their burned asset just conducted a one-woman assault on a terrorist cell. I know, Elena replied. Good. Holt's expression hardened into something that looked almost like a smile. Because I am recommending you for a commendation, and I am requesting your permanent assignment to my team. If you want it. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then at the team gathering behind him, battered and bleeding, but alive. Her team now, if she chose to accept them. I want it, she said. The debrief lasted 7 hours. Elena sat in a windowless room at FOB Kestrel, while a parade of officers, intelligence analysts, and video conference screens demanded answers. She walked them through the operation methodically, from her first shot on the ridgeline to the final confrontation in the schoolhouse. Maps were produced. Timelines were constructed. Every kill was documented and analyzed. The agency representatives arrived on the 4th hour, 2 men in civilian clothes whose expressions suggested they had been pulled from something more important. They were not happy. A burned asset conducting unauthorized field operations created paperwork nightmares and interagency complications that would take months to untangle. But the results were difficult to argue with. 7 high-value targets eliminated. A terrorist cell dismantled. Intelligence materials that were already yielding actionable information about networks across 3 countries. By the time the debrief concluded, the agency men had shifted from irritation to something approaching grudging respect. We will be in touch, Vasquez, the senior representative said as he left. Your status is going to require review. Elena nodded. She had expected nothing less. The sun was setting by the time she finally escaped the operation center. Her body ached in ways she had almost forgotten, muscles reminding her that 6 years behind a desk had taken their toll despite her private training regimen. She found a quiet spot near the northern perimeter and sat down on an empty ammunition crate, watching the sky turn colors she did not have names for. Footsteps approached. She knew who it was before he spoke. Mind if I sit? Reese asked. Elena gestured to the crate beside her. He settled down with a grunt, his wounded arm held carefully against his chest. They sat in silence for a while, watching the Afghan sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire and blood. When Reese finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Will you tell me about him? The man in the photograph. Elena considered the question. She had not spoken about Marcos to anyone in 6 years. The grief had become a private thing, a weight she carried alone because sharing it felt like betrayal. But Reese had earned something tonight. They all had. His name was Marcos Reyes, she said. We worked together for 4 years. He was from a small town in New Mexico, joined the army at 18, got recruited by the agency after his second combat tour. He was funny, brave, the kind of man who made you better just by being around him. You loved him. Elena did not answer directly. The photograph was taken the day before our last operation together. We were in a safe house in Beirut, waiting for extraction to Damascus. He made me pose for it, because he said we never took enough pictures. He said we would want to remember the good days when we got old. Her voice caught slightly on the last word. She pushed through it. The next day, everything went wrong. Someone sold us out. Marcos took 3 rounds in the chest, getting me to the extraction point. I held his hand while he bled out in a Damascus alley, and then I had to leave him there because the helicopter would not wait. Reese was quiet for a long moment. I am sorry, he said finally. That is not enough, but I am sorry. Elena nodded. The words did not fix anything, but they helped somehow. The photograph, Reese said slowly. You look at it every night. I saw you that first evening before the mission brief. It reminds me why I keep going. Elena pulled the worn image from her pocket and looked at Marcos's smile one more time. And it reminds me what I lost when I stopped being who I really was. Reese leaned forward slightly. Did you find it today? Whatever you were looking for? Elena thought about the question. About 7 targets falling one by one. About Holt's handshake and Webb's nod and the weight of belonging she had felt climbing into that helicopter. Maybe, she said. Part of it. They sat together until the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Then Reese stood, wincing slightly, and headed back toward the barracks. Elena remained, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Burke found her an hour later. He approached awkwardly, his usual swagger absent. He stood a few feet away for a long moment, clearly struggling with something he did not know how to say. Vasquez, he finally managed. I wanted to... His voice trailed off. Elena waited. I was wrong about you, Burke said. The words came out stiff, like they hurt to speak. I treated you badly because I thought I knew what you were. I did not. Elena looked at him. She could have made him suffer for it, could have demanded a fuller apology, forced him to articulate every insult and dismissal. But she had spent too many years carrying grudges already. Thank you, she said simply. I appreciate you saying that. Burke nodded once, relief flickering across his face, and retreated into the darkness. Webb appeared shortly after, as if he had been waiting for Burke to leave. He sat down on the crate Reese had vacated and said nothing for a while. 20 years, he said finally. I have been doing this for 20 years. Worked with the best operators on the planet. Elena waited. You are the best I have ever seen. Webb's voice carried no flattery, only assessment. Male or female does not matter. What you did tonight was exceptional by any standard. I had advantages they did not know about. Webb shook his head. Training only takes you so far. What you did requires something else. Something that cannot be taught. He paused. You just had not been allowed to operate. The words landed somewhere deep in Elena's chest. She had spent 6 years being told she was too valuable to risk, too compromised to trust, too damaged to deploy. 6 years of watching from the sidelines, while others did the work she was born for. Tonight, she had finally been allowed to be herself. Thank you, Senior Chief. Webb stood and walked away without another word. Night fell fully over FOB Kestrel. Elena sat in the darkness, cleaning her rifle by feel, the familiar motion soothing something that had been ragged for too long. Footsteps approached again, heavier this time. Command presence in every stride. Got a minute, Warrant Officer? Holt asked. His tone was different, softer somehow. This was not about debriefs or commendations. This was something else. Elena set down her rifle. Of course, Commander. Holt sat down on the ammunition crate beside her, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who had made a decision and was committing to it fully. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, the stars overhead bright enough to cast faint shadows. I want to tell you about Carla Torres, he said. Elena set aside the rifle she had been cleaning. She had heard fragments of the story from others, but she understood that this was different. This was Holt choosing to share something he had kept buried for 4 years. She was CIA, like you, Holt began, attached to my team for an operation in Helmand Province. I did not want her there. Told my superiors she would be a liability. They overruled me. What happened? Holt was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. The operation went sideways. We breached a compound that turned out to be a trap, same as tonight. 2 of my men went down in the initial ambush. The rest of us were pinned, taking fire from 3 directions. Extraction was inbound, but it was going to be close. He paused, and Elena could see the memory playing out behind his eyes. Carla was supposed to stay back. That was the deal. She was intelligent support, not a trigger puller. But when Morrison and Chun went down, she did not hesitate. She ran into the open, grabbed Morrison by his vest, and dragged him to cover. Then she went back for Chun. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. She knew how this story ended, but hearing it from Holt gave it a different weight. She took a round in the throat, pulling Chun behind a wall. Holt continued. I watched her fall. I watched her try to keep fighting even with blood pouring down her chest. She saved both of them. Morrison and Chun are alive today because of what she did. She sounds like a hero. She was. Holt's voice cracked slightly on the word. But I could not accept that. I could not accept that a woman had died saving my men. So I told myself a different story. I told myself she died because I let her come along. Because I failed to protect her from a situation she was not equipped to handle. He turned to face Elena directly. I have been telling myself that story for 4 years, using it as an excuse to keep women away from combat, to sideline anyone who reminded me of what happened. I told myself I was being protective, but the truth is I was being a coward. Elena considered his words carefully. You are grieving, she said. Grief makes us do strange things. That is not an excuse. No, Elena agreed. It is not, but it is human. Holt nodded slowly. Something shifted in his expression, a weight lifting that had been pressing down for too long. Carla Torres deserved better than the story I told about her, he said. She deserved to be remembered as what she was. A warrior who gave everything for her team. She sounded like someone worth remembering correctly. Holt almost smiled. She does. They sat in silence for a while. Two people who had carried their grief like armor, finally allowing themselves to set some of it down. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath them. The intelligence you recovered, Holt said eventually. The analysts finished their preliminary assessment. Farhan's network was planning a coordinated attack on 3 coalition bases. Hundreds of casualties, maybe thousands. Elena absorbed this quietly. She had known the stakes were high, but hearing the numbers made it real in a different way. Because of what you did tonight, those attacks will never happen. Holt's voice carried a gravity that went beyond military formality. You saved more lives than you will ever know. I was just doing my job. No. Holt shook his head. You were doing the job we would not let you do. That is different. He stood and extended his hand. Elena took it, and he pulled her to her feet. The commendation ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow, he said. Small affair, just the team and a few senior officers. But I wanted you to know it means something. What you did matters. Thank you, Commander. Holt held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he nodded and walked away into the darkness, leaving Elena alone with the stars and the quiet peace that had finally found its way into her chest. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph one last time. Marcos smiled up at her, frozen in a moment of happiness that felt like another lifetime. She traced the outline of his face with her thumb, the way she had done 1,000 times before. But something was different now. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but no longer felt like chains. It felt like wings. I did it, she whispered to him. I found my way back. She tucked the photograph away, not in her pocket this time, but in the inner lining of her vest, close to her heart, but no longer something she needed to see every night. Marcos would always be with her, but she no longer needed the reminder to keep fighting. The commendation ceremony the next day was brief and dignified. Elena stood at attention, while a colonel she had never met pinned a medal to her chest and spoke words about valor and sacrifice. The team stood behind her, Reese grinning, Webb nodding, even Burke managing something that looked almost like pride. Afterward, Holt gathered them for a mission brief. New intelligence had come in, a secondary network connected to Farhan's cell operating in a neighboring province. Vasquez, Holt said, what is your tactical assessment? The team turned to look at her, not with skepticism or dismissal, but with genuine interest. With respect, Elena studied the map for a moment, tracing the terrain with practiced eyes. She outlined approach vectors, identified potential ambush points, suggested modifications to the standard assault plan. The team listened. Holt nodded. Good, he said when she finished. We move out in 2 hours. Gear up. The team dispersed to prepare. Elena gathered her equipment with the familiar efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. Rifle, ammunition, tactical vest, communications gear. The tools of a trade she had spent 6 years being denied. Reese appeared beside her as she made final checks. Ready for round 2, he asked. Elena looked at him, then at the rest of the team moving with purpose around them. Her team now, her brothers in arms, however unlikely that had seemed just 48 hours ago. Ready, she said. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part. Tell us about your favorite character, or share if you have ever witnessed someone reveal hidden abilities when it mattered most. Your support means everything. The helicopters lifted off into the Afghan morning, carrying Elena and her team toward whatever came next. She watched the mountains pass beneath them, ancient and indifferent, and felt something she had not felt in 6 years. She felt like she belonged. The past would always be with her. Marcos, Damascus, the years of exile behind a desk. But the future was unwritten, and for the first time in a long time, Elena Vasquez was ready to write herself. She checked her rifle one more time and smiled.